All right, ready for a deep dive? We're jumping into the world of medical education today.
Always exciting.
But don't worry, you don't need a stethoscope for this one.
Okay, good to know.
We're looking at a study that's got some really cool insights for, well, anyone who's ever had to, study for a test.
Oh, so everyone then?
Pretty much. The big idea here is assessment as learning, or AAL for short.
Kitschy.
Right.
Yeah.
So instead of thinking of tests as this big, scary evaluation, what if they were actually a chance to learn more?
Interesting.
Like, I wouldn't expect to rebuild a car engine just by reading a manual, right?
Hands-on experience is key.
Exactly. You have to actually do it to learn it.
Absolutely. And that's what AAL is all about, making assessment an active part of learning, not just a box to check.
And that's what this study we're diving into really gets at. Researchers over at the Mohammed bin Rashid University of Medicine and Health Sciences, they wanted to see how this whole AAL thing plays out in the real world.
Sounds ambitious.
It was. They took 54 second-year med students, all in the same pathology course, and had them do something pretty wild.
Okay, I'm intrigued what they do.
They had the students create their own test questions.
Wow, that's a bold move. So they actually had to design the assessment they'd be graded on.
Exactly. And the researchers weren't just looking at if it, boosted their test scores. They wanted to understand the whole student experience.
So get into their heads how they feel about it all.
Mhm.
Do they think it actually helped them learn?
Exactly. And they used a super smart way to do that, a mixed methods approach.
Which means,
So they collected both quantitative data, like hard numbers from surveys,
right, makes sense.
but also qualitative data, meaning the students' actual words and thoughts from focus groups.
Okay, so a much more well-rounded view.
Right, you get the full picture that way. So we've got 54 second-year med students, one pathology course, and a research team ready to dive deep into this whole AAL thing.
Can't wait to see what they found.
Me neither. But before we get to the nitty-gritty, let's take a step back and think about why this all matters, even if you aren't studying to be a doctor.
Good point. What's the bigger picture here?
All right, so we've set the stage.
Time for the big reveal. Drum roll, please.
Did this whole assessment as learning thing actually work?
Well, when they asked the students straight up, did creating your own test questions help you learn? The results were pretty impressive.
Okay, spill the tea.
A whopping 84% of the students said yes.
84%. That's huge. So flipping the script on assessment, having students design the questions themselves, it really seemed to click for them.
It really did. And what's cool is the study didn't just stop at did their grades go up? It dug into how this approach made them feel about learning, which I think is super important.
Totally. It's one thing to ace a test, it's another to actually feel like you're mastering the material.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. There was this one statement in the survey that, I don't know, it kind of threw me off.
Oh, what was it?
It asked the students if they agreed with the statement, this whole creating my own test questions thing, it really forced me out of my comfort zone.
Interesting. You'd think that would be a given, right? I mean, designing an exam has got to be more challenging than just taking one.
Right. But, and here's the kicker, the students didn't totally agree with that statement.
Really? So they didn't find it all that challenging?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. See, when you actually read what the students had to say about the experience, a different picture starts to emerge.
Okay, I'm hooked. What were they saying?
They talked about how, yeah, it was challenging, but in a good way. Like, it forced them to engage with the material on a deeper level than they ever would before.
So it wasn't just about memorizing facts. They had to really understand the concepts inside and out.
Precisely. Because to create a good test question, you can't just regurgitate information. You have to be able to anticipate different angles, different interpretations. It's like that saying, the best way to learn something is to teach it.
Oh, for sure. I remember back in college, I always felt like I learned the most when I was explaining something to a classmate who was struggling.
There you go. And that's what's so powerful about this approach. It taps into that active, constructive way of learning, like we were talking about earlier, constructivism, self-regulated learning, all that good stuff.
It's not just about passively absorbing information, it's about building your own understanding, piece by piece.
Exactly. And the students even said as much. One of them said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that crafting exam questions forced them to think about the material differently, which made their understanding stronger.
Oh, I love that. And they weren't just becoming walking textbooks either. They were developing those critical thinking skills, that flexibility, which is, let's be honest, way more valuable in the long run.
100%. And it wasn't all serious academic talk either. Some of the students even compared the experience to a game.
Wait, seriously? They gamified pathology? That's kind of amazing.
Right. They were like, oh, we started quizzing each other with our questions, even using pathology terms in everyday conversation. It became this fun, competitive way to learn.
That's incredible. It sounds like they were actually enjoying the process, which, let's be real, is not always the case with med school.
For real.
Hmm.
But I think it speaks to the power of tapping into our natural love of challenge, of mastery, of, little friendly competition.
I'm sold. So we've got students saying they learned more, they felt more engaged, they even had some fun along the way. It's like the holy grail of education.
I know, right? But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The study does point out some challenges and limitations that are worth unpacking.
Okay, so before we went to break, we were talking about those, bumps in the road, the challenges that came with this whole assessment as learning thing.
Right, right, because no approach is perfect.
Exactly. So what were some of the things the students themselves found tricky about this whole create your own test question thing?
Well, one thing that popped up a lot was the teamwork aspect.
Ah, yeah, group projects, always a classic.
Right. And remember, these students were tasked with building these assessments together collaboratively. And I think we all know group work, well, it doesn't always go as planned.
Yeah, no kidding. Even with the best intentions, things can get a little, shall we say, interesting.
For sure. And the study actually quotes one of the students who ran into this very issue. They said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, that some team members just didn't really pull their weight, which led to some frustration, let's just say.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. It's tough when you're putting in the effort and it feels like everyone's not quite on the same page.
Exactly. And I think it highlights a really important point.
Yeah.
Even in these high-pressure professional environments like med school, you can't just assume teamwork will magically happen. You need structure, you need clear expectations, and you definitely need ways to deal with those moments when someone might be slacking a bit.
So it's about more than just changing how we assess. It's about building a learning environment that supports that kind of deep collaborative work.
100%. And that actually ties into another limitation the study brings up. Remember, this was just one course with a pretty specific group of students, all second-year med students, in the same pathology class.
Right, so it's not exactly representative of like the entire spectrum of learning experiences.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, how would this approach work in different contexts? Like, what about different year levels, different subjects altogether? What works for a pathology course might not fly in a literature seminar.
For sure. And what about the long game? Like, does this love of learning through assessment, does that last? Or does it kind of fizzle out after a while? Those are some good questions for future research.
Absolutely. And those are the questions researchers are super interested in digging into further. But here's the cool part. You don't have to wait for more research to start experimenting with these ideas in your own life.
Ooh, I like where you're going with this. What are some ways our listeners can, dip their toes into this whole assessment as learning thing, even if they aren't designing med school exams?
Well, think about how you can bring some of that active, engaging, maybe even a little challenging energy into how you learn. Like, instead of just passively rereading your notes, what if you tried making your own study guide? Or even better, come up with some practice questions.
Oh, I love that. It's like we were saying before about teaching being the best way to learn. When you have to explain something to someone else, or in this case, create a question that really tests their understanding, it forces you to really know your stuff.
Right. It's about going beyond just memorizing facts and getting to that deeper level of understanding.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big takeaway is this. What if we stopped being afraid of tests? What if we started seeing them not as these big, scary evaluations, but as opportunities to really, truly learn and grow?
It's about changing the whole mindset around assessment, making it a tool for learning, not just a hurdle to clear.
I love that. It's about empowering learners to shape their own understanding. Now, that's an exciting thought. And for all our listeners out there, here's a little something to ponder. If you were to design your own assessment as a learning experience, what would it look like? What subject or skill would you choose? And how would you make it challenging, engaging, maybe even a little bit fun? Let us know. Hit us up on social media and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear them.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, we're all lifelong learners here, right?
Yeah, Mary Moore. Until next time, happy learning, everyone.